Welcome back to the Finding Joy in Your Home podcast. I have a really, really fun interview today that gave me lots of things to think about. And if you have ever thought about writing your own book, or you have a spouse who is, or a friend, there's just so many great ideas that Brian and I are going to talk about today. I have interviewed Brian several times in the past, and every time he is just a wealth of information. So it's going to be super fun. You're going to hear from our sponsor in a little while for today's episode, which is Mosh. And if you are watching on YouTube, you have already figured out by now that there is no video of the podcast this week. Jason's going to put the audio on YouTube still, but we don't have video because we are in the middle of moving. In fact, we just moved out of our house. We are now in our RV and everything is total chaos. So you don't want to see what I'm looking at right now because it is crazy. So we're not going to have a video this week. Hopefully the video will be back next week as we get set up. If not, it'll be the week after. So you're going to miss seeing my beautiful face today, but you can listen along on YouTube. Audio people, it's not going to be any different for you. Okay, so in this interview, Brian and I are talking about how do you write a book? And we're talking some really practical logistics. And I have met so many people who've said, I've always wanted to write a book. And Jason and I were two of those people. Always have said, I want to write a book one day. But often it never gets beyond, I want to write a book. And so today we're talking really practical steps on what does that look like? How do you get a book published? What are the best options today? And just a lot of motivation too. If you have a dream, if you have a message, if you have something that you want to get out there, that is what we are diving into. And it's just a really good conversation. So I will stop yammering about that and we will just go ahead and jump over right into the interview. Hey ladies, welcome to this next session. Very, very excited about this. I have got the awesome Brian Dixon from Hope Media here. We're going to be talking about writing a book. How do you know if you are ready to write a book? How do you get started? All of that. So Brian, welcome to the conference.
Jami, thanks for having me. I'm really excited. I think a book is something that a lot of people have dreamed about doing one day, but there's 82% of people say they want to write a book one day, but less than 1% actually write and publish a book. So I see it kind of in my mission in the world to help you get your book written and done. So yes. Get your book done.
Yeah, well, good. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today is those beginning steps.
Awesome.
So before we jump into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and what you do?
Yes, I am a married dad of 3 kids and now a dog. Julie and I met in teacher preparation school. So we were working on our teacher certificate, classroom teacher for several years. So we met at a little Bible college and fell in love and got married. And we've been married 22 years now. And we have 3 kiddos. They are all turning to teenagers. So we have an almost 15-year-old and then an 11-year-old and a almost 9-year-old. And I've been full-time online for 11 years. So I did 14 years as a K-12 classroom teacher and a school administrator. I wrote my first book about social media and how to use social media as a leader to kind of build your audience as a leader, specifically for school leaders. And I just absolutely fell in love with the writing and publishing process. And I was like, I can do more of this by helping other people. And that was 11 years ago. So for 11 years, I've co-run a membership site for writers called Hopewriters. We have an annual conference called the Hope Story Conference. And about 2 years ago, we started publishing our own books with authors who the traditional publishing didn't make a lot of sense for them. Self-publishing felt overwhelming. So we're kind of that middle of the road option, what we call hybrid publishing. And we call it Hope Books. And we've published 22 books so far. So it's been a lot of fun.
That is awesome. And I didn't realize you're just a couple years ahead of us. My husband quit his job in 2015 to run our business full time. So we're almost coming up on that decade, which just feels crazy. Like, I mean, a lot has happened in the last 10 years, but also how has it already been almost 10 years, which is crazy.
It is crazy. I'm definitely unemployable. Like I could never go get a full-time job with one company now. It just sounds so crazy. So I just, I just believe that many of us are made for something different than working for a big company. And the coolest thing, I believe that now is the best time to ever be alive. Like what an incredible opportunity to live in this day and age where you can literally access anybody the world's information is at your fingertips. You know, when I was in high school, I was really into music. I'm still really into music, but like for me to go find the new album from like my favorite band, like I would have to drive and go through like the little CD rack. Maybe I'm really dating myself, but it's like, oh my goodness, I can like out loud right now, like right now, if I said a certain keyword and play a certain song, that song would play and throughout my whole house.
Yeah.
That's completely insane.
Yeah.
If I can pick out like this little metal and glass device, and in about 8 seconds, it could play any movie that's ever been produced in the history of the world. And most of it's free because I have all these subscriptions, right? Like, so now is the most incredible time to share your message of hope because people are consuming messages. And so I think you have to decide to be a producer rather than a consumer. And I know that's a lot of the people watching right now. You make stuff. And so I'm so excited to help you kind of figure out how to make your book if that's something that you want to do.
Well, and that's a great topic because there is never a better time to be the tools that we have, the publishing platforms we have. And what I hear from a lot of people as well, Jami, you've been doing it for a long time. You got in at the right time, which is not the case. We've never had a single thing go viral. Like it's been year after year. And yes, there's a lot of noise online today, but it also gives you the opportunity to stand out because there's a lot of junk out there too. That's just nothing. And so there are, I mean, it feels like it's overcrowded, but it's really not. There's so many opportunities still.
That's right. Yeah, it was 10 years ago when I first started. After about 6 months of trying to figure out what I want to do, I'm like, I'm going to start a personal development YouTube channel. Like that's what I'm going to do. And I called it the Advance Show because I want to help you advance your life. Like I did not know what I was doing. The first 10 videos, I was literally wearing a suit and tie, like on YouTube, wearing a suit and tie and filming in my second bedroom, you know? And it's so funny because one of my videos that I was very nervous to do, I called it 3 Habits Your Wife Will Love. And I was like, imposter syndrome. Like I've only been married at that point about 10 or 11 years. What do I know about marriage? Like I have nothing really good to say, but I'm like, these are 3 things that have been really helpful. And so I made this video over 10 years ago. I quit the channel after about 40 videos. I'm like, I'm never touching that again. That was too overwhelming, too hard. I've moved on to other things. And then just 3 nights ago, my family and I are sitting around after dinner. We're like, let's like look on YouTube, look at some of the old videos. And that video came up. When I launched that video 10 years ago, I mean, literally in the first week, it got maybe 8 views. And it was like, okay, what a failure. I'm a failure. I should, you know, that whole mindset. Guess what? In 10 years, that video has had 160,000 views.
Wow.
And I didn't even know. Like, I didn't even care. I didn't even look. I didn't even look back. And I just think about the ripple effect of the things that I shared in that video, knowing that maybe 1% of 1% actually did the things that I talked about. And maybe they didn't get a divorce. Like maybe they stayed together. Like maybe their marriage improved because of one thing I made 10 years ago. Yeah. And so I just believe like we just need to scatter seed, but the results are not up to us at all.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and that's really what we're talking about. So like I titled this talk, How to Write a Book That You've Always Dreamed of. Yes. And there are so many of us that feel like there is this book inside me that I want to write, but it's so hard. So do you find that? Do you find that there are a lot of people who really talk about wanting to write a book, but it obviously just never comes to fruition?
Oh, it happens all the time. It actually happens when somebody signs up for our book publishing process, which is a 365-day process. We've got it narrowed down to 12 months, and you get a little coaching video. It's a 3 to 5 days assignment. You do the assignment, you do the next thing. It's like very step by step. And even with it being as simplified and as streamlined as possible, people still want to quit. People still get overwhelmed. Yeah. Because why? Because so much of it, I'm just going to go there. I think it's fear of man. We are afraid what our mother-in-law thinks of us or what our friends are going to think of us. But I really believe that if you believe that you have a story to share, what you've been through isn't wasted when you share it with somebody else, that your hard story can become your hope story. And so you've been through something that was really hard, drama and trauma. Like there's been hard things in your life, but you're still here. And so that story of I'm still here, somebody who's not there yet needs to hear that story. And so who cares what your mother-in-law thinks or your friend from college or your neighbor across the street? Like your story is your story. And that the way that you share it is the thing that might connect to somebody and be the key to unlock the prison in their life. And so, the imposter syndrome, the feeling of overwhelm, the feeling of like, I don't have what it takes, or some famous person already read a book on a similar topic. No one has your experience and nobody has the story that you have to share.
Yeah. One, talking about imposter syndrome, nobody's thinking about you as much as you think that they are. Like
Oh, it's so
nobody
true.
really cares
Yeah.
nearly as much as in your head you think so.
Oh my goodness. It's absolutely true. And the way to know that is just to shoe on the other foot. Like, when was the last time you thought about somebody else? You're just like, I mean, it's very rare,
Yeah.
and especially somebody going through like a really big life crisis. You're like, oh man, I'm sorry you're going through a life crisis. I'll pray for you. I forget to do it. And then a couple weeks later, you're like, oh yeah, I think they're going through something. It's just like, it's human nature. Like, we are very self-driven. And I think there's a way to lean into that and to know that in the economy now, you can receive that self-fulfillment of the amazing feeling of accomplishment of writing a book for yourself. Like, it's such a great feeling to be able to log on to Amazon and go, there's my book. Look how many I've sold. Like, that feels great. But the cool thing is you're also helping people at the same time. Like, you can have both. You can create something that's amazing for you and also helps other people. And I just think there's no better way to live than being able to do that.
Well, and so your book right behind you, Start With Your People. I read it a long time ago, but that was really the focus of that book, right?
Yes, that's right. I think so many of us are looking. One of my friends has a book called Stop Chasing Influencers. And I love that idea. Like, we're looking for the famous person to sort of pat us on the head and say, good job. But that's not who we're here for. We're here for the people across the dinner table from us. Yeah. My people, even on the book cover, like it's got these little avatars of people. And the first person is my wife. Like, if I'm not showing up for Julie every day, like, I have no business having clients. Like, I've got to show up for the people in my life, for my wife, for my two boys, for my daughter, for my grandma. My father-in-law is going through a hard time. Like, I need to show up for him. And when you start with the people across the dinner table from you, it just gives you a framework in which to share from that feeling of abundance, right? Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so if I'm not filled up at home, I have nothing to give out in the workplace.
Yeah. Well, it's such a great reminder in that my husband has been writing a children's book series. He has 6 books out so far. Wow. And when we were writing them, he's like, I don't know. I'm sitting there going, oh, these are amazing. They're great. But for him, he's like, I don't know if anyone's going to read them. And I'm like, you know what? If all it is you've made these books for our children. It was following where he's traveling the national parks with our real family, kind of mimicking that. It's our kids that are in it. And so I'm like, if that's all it is that our kids have these books that dad wrote, right? That was all, that was worth it. And yet they've been very popular and people love them. But right there, if that's all it is, then you've won. Like, that's a legacy right there to pass down to your kids. And that's amazing.
That's right. We just have a really weird measuring stick now, where we kind of have this false belief of, like, if it doesn't hit some sort of sales metrics or some sort of New York Times bestseller list or top in a category or something, like, we make these rules for ourselves. But what I found is, like, real art, like, you just don't know how it's going to connect. And if you really think about it, some of our favorite movies from growing up are not really that well known. Like, some of my favorite musicians, my favorite songs are like the B-sides, like the deep cuts, but they're the ones that impact me the most. And so I think that what we try to do is we take something that we feel called to do, something that feels like art, something that feels so personal, and then we try to add like commerce on it and try to say it's only successful if it sells a lot or if it goes viral. And that's just not true, because again, shoe on the other foot, you look at the things that have impacted you, and they're not the things that were the big mega sellers. They're the things that were the most authentic and real. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for heart connection.
Well, that's a perfect lead up then, because my next question was, how do you know if you have the right idea? So you're thinking, I really want to write this book. Yeah. How do you know that this is what you should actually start writing on?
Yeah. Well, I love the idea of just surrendering the idea of right. Like, there really is no right. We have a lot of options. Like, I believe we're all given free will, and we just have a lot of choice. And we have a lot more choice than we've ever had before, right? Like, if you think about it, maybe 50 years ago or 100 years ago, we were very locked into what was possible. Like, your dad was a farmer, you're probably going to be a farmer. Like, that's just kind of the way it works. Now you can literally do anything you want. like anything you want, which is crazy. The way that I like to share this with our first time authors is I want you to imagine that you are now 85 years old and your family's finally putting you in that retirement facility and you're moving out of your little condo or your house that you've lived in your whole life. And as you're packing up everything, you get to that shelf of your life's work. It's all the books you've written, and this might be a little bit more metaphorical, but it's like all the videos you've posted, all the courses you've created, all the art that you've made in your whole life. That's your shelf of your life's work. How many things are on there? Like, how many things are on that shelf? It's probably more than one. It's not just one book that magically encapsulates the lessons of your entire life. There might be a book on parenting. There might be a book on marriage. There might be a book about your personal story. There might be a scrapbook of things that you've done or gone through. There might be that little project that you did with your kids that kind of took off for a year or two. Like if you look back over your life from back from your future, you go to the future and you look back, you're like, I actually made like 12 things. And so instead of trying to take your first book and make it the 12 all in one, just make it one. So the way that we teach in Hope Media is the XYZ statement. I help X overcome Y so they can Z. So it's like, who's the person that you want to help with this particular book? Not all the books, but one book. What's the one problem that reader's facing right now? And what's the solution that you've discovered that you can share with her? And the more niche, the more rich. Like that's so cheesy, but it's true.
Yeah.
The more clear, like your husband's book about national parks, who buys those? Families with kids who love national parks.
Yeah.
Right? Like right now, as soon as you said that, I'm like, oh, my friend Glenn, his family's going to all the national parks. They need to know about that.
Yep.
And the way that we teach at Hope Media is you want your content to be discoverable and referable. Discoverable is when you can Google it and find it. So if you Google National Park book for kids, your husband's book will come up. So that's the discoverable. The referable is you just told me about it and I immediately thought of somebody who would want it because it's so specific.
Yeah.
So be specific in your first book. You can always write book number 2. But when book number 1 is very specific, then you can grow out from there. Instead of starting really wide and getting narrow, you start narrow and you can branch out from there.
Yeah, that's great. I've been working on a book that I have this like vague concept in mind. And I've been reading all these books and all this research, and it like my brain starts going in all these rabbit trails. And then all this, I'm like, it's like this behemoth of an idea. And I did realize a couple months ago, I need to start like, those are going to be separate books. I need to start pairing this out, but that can be a hard process too, of trying to figure out, okay, what's the one main point for this book and what does need to be included and what's not. It can be a difficult process.
That's right. Now, this might be a little controversial, but I believe in using the robot librarian. There is, if you think about a librarian, like a true librarian, when you go to the library, a real librarian who's been trained is very helpful. Let's say she helps you with research. She knows where all the books are. She even knows what the books say. She knows inside of the books because she's an amazing librarian. And when you go to the library and you say, hey, I need some help, or what do you think? She's an expert at books. And there's now this thing that I call the robot librarian. And the robot librarian knows all the world's information, and you can ask her questions and she'll tell you answers based on all the world's knowledge. Now, of course, I'm talking about ChatGPT. I'm talking about AI. And so what you can do is you can take your book itself, like you can take your whole book and say, here's my book. How many books should this be? And the robot librarian would be like, that's actually 3 books, friend. And they'll be nice. Like the robot librarian's super nice and says, you know what? That's actually 3 books. And you say, oh, that's 3 books. Well, what should the first one be called? And then it'll look at all the world's information and say, this is probably what this book should be called. Now, you don't let the librarian write the book for you. That would be crazy. But it's more like a research assistant. So we really use a lot of the AI stuff. I know people are kind of freaked out about the AI stuff. But what I've found is like, if you think about it, all the world's information is accessible. And so our job, because AI can't create, but it can distill information. And so instead of us trying to make hard decisions, like which book should I read next because I have this goal in mind, why don't you go ask a librarian? Hey, I have this goal in mind. What book should I read next? And we've been using it as a creative brainstorming tool. Like, hey, I've got these 2 ideas. This is kind of where I am in my life. Which one should I write first? And it'll give you advice, which I think can be really, really powerful. So you can just focus on the creating instead of having to make all those decisions.
Yeah. I just recently wrote a homeschool curriculum on homesteading and gardening. And
Yep.
when I sat down, it was 4 units and I was having such a hard time figuring out what needs to go where. And so I sat down with ChatGPT and was just like, how to start a garden. And I just wanted to think like, what sort of layout? Oh yeah, I'm missing that beginning step. And it can really help kind of just lay out some stuff. And I didn't just take that and make it my outline, but it was that inspiration to go, oh yes. And it just, sometimes the hardest part is just getting started and just that first step of getting your brain organized to where you can actually get in that creative mode. And I have found that to be very helpful with that brainstorming kind of creativity start point.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's get practical on actually writing a book. So we've got our idea in mind, where we've honed it down a little bit. Where do we actually start? How do you start writing a book?
Yes, you start writing a book by not starting to write the book. That is the biggest mistake that I see people make. Is they go, okay, I know that my book is going to be for moms who have 2 kids. The oldest kid is going into middle school and they're thinking of homeschooling for middle school. Okay, that's pretty clear about what the book's going to be about. And it's basically going to be an argument for why homeschooling in middle school is a good idea. And that's what the book's about. That's a very clear book. Should I homeschool for middle school? Okay, great. Now that I'd call that the XYZ statement. Now you don't open up your Microsoft Word or Google Documents and go, it was 3 years ago and I was thinking, no, because you don't know where you're going. It's like getting in the car and just starting to drive. You're like, where are we going? I don't know, but we're going to get there really fast. Like, where are you going? And what's going to happen is it's going to get really overwhelming and you're going to get lost. And so what we teach at Hope Books is we call it the transformational tale. So the transformational tale essentially is your detailed outline. So that is where people are stuck. Chapter 1, success is chapter 12. And what are the 10 steps to go from stuck to success? Or the way that I like to think about it, because I'm a Bible guy, is I think about the Israelites and Moses and Egypt and the Exodus. I think about they were in prison. So they start with prison, chapter 1, and then the promised land is chapter 12. And what's the path? So prison, promise, path. And your book is the path to walk people from prison to the promised land. And so if it's, I haven't decided what am I going to do? Oh, this is so overwhelming. That's chapter 1. You write that. And then chapter 12, write that. And then what you're just doing is you're just kind of backfilling it. So you're going, okay, if that's chapter 12, what's chapter 11? If that's chapter 11, what's chapter 10? So you can write it backwards or you can write it forwards. This is where they're stuck. What's the first step that they need to take in order to get unstuck? And you'll find your way kind of towards that middle. So that's what we recommend. It's to start your book is the transformational tale.
So don't get bogged down in it having to be perfect, or you're writing introduction and first word, because I think that's where it stops a lot of people. I can't get past this, how do I introduce the first paragraph? So just get writing.
Yeah, you write the transformational tale. That's your outline. And so basically, and there's a lot of ways to do it. I mean, my favorite way to do it is to either whiteboard it out or put it on note cards or Post-it notes. So if you got a stack of note cards or Post-it notes, and you put them out on your kitchen table or even on your wall, and you say, okay, this is stuck. And then this is success, or this is prison, this is promised land. And then what are the different things that I did? Because you mine your past for diamonds. You go back into your life and you go, I remember that I talked to that mentor. Okay, that's going to be a chapter. I remember that I did some research on different kinds of homeschooling. So I should have a chapter on the 3 kinds of homeschooling. Okay, that's going to be a chapter. And so as you look back on what you did, and then as you look back and you did, you'll also think about a friend did this and I wish I did that. So those can all be chapters. And then you kind of outline it that way. And then when you're ready to write, which I would now call, you have the outline stage. Now you're going to have the drafting stage. There's three steps of drafting. And this is, I quote Annie Lamott. She wrote this great book called Bird by Bird, which is all about writing. And she calls it's 3 steps. You have the downdraft, the updraft, and the dental draft. So the downdraft is where you get it out and you get it down. That is going to be garbage, right? It's going to be, you're going to have run-on sentences. You're going to tell the story 3 different ways. You're just going to be like, blah. And don't edit while you write. Just get it out of your head. So that's draft number 1 is the downdraft. Draft number 2 is the cleanup. You're going to clean it up. You're going to reorganize. You're going to say, oh, that story needs to be in the beginning instead of the middle. I got to move things around. And that's kind of the overall structure draft. Somebody could read that and you'd be like pretty okay with it. And then there's the dental draft. And this is what I recommend somebody else does. Don't edit your own work. So somebody else is going to be like your copy assistant, and they're going to go line by line, because when you write, you're filling in the gaps for yourself. So you're actually going to skip words and sentences, which is really weird. But we just kind of go, oh, that's the way I normally say it. But then when somebody else reads it, they're going to see the missing words and they're going to have to fill it in. So if you do it, those 3 steps of the drafting process, you're going to have something you're really proud of.
That's great. That's good starting place. So why don't can you give us a really quick opinion on traditional publishing versus self-publishing? This is what I get asked all the time.
Oh, yeah.
So can you give us your opinion on that?
Okay. So traditional publishing has really changed, really changed. With traditional publishing, the reason they call it traditional publishing is because the way it used to be. So the way it used to be is there was this big company and they had a special exclusive relationship with booksellers. So there was and they own their printing press too. So it's a big company that owns the printing. And then what would happen is they need to have books that they can sell to the booksellers, and the booksellers, like the Barnes and Nobles of the world, are going to sell it to the reader. That was how it used to work. You have the publisher, who's the printer, you have the bookseller, who's the retailer, and then you have the reader, who's the book buyer. Those 3 steps. Amazon broke it. They totally changed the whole system. So what's happened now is that all the publishers don't print their own books anymore. And the printers have now become democratized, where anybody can access those printers. So there's really no reason to use a traditional publisher, except for if they're willing to throw a lot of money at you. And so big publishers have found that the only way that they make money is if they sell 1 million copies of a book. So they're looking for internet famous authors. And so most authors, especially first-time authors, are just not going to get a traditional publishing deal. And if they do, it's what's called a catalog deal, where basically they're signing on a book because they want to fill their catalog, not because they want to sell a lot of copies. So even if you end up landing a book deal with a traditional publisher, they're like, that's going to be that's going to be like the home. I'm going to put it in the homeschool section in Barnes and Noble, and it's going to go for like, should I homeschool middle school? But I think I'll only sell like maybe 1 copy per Barnes and Noble per year. So maybe a couple hundred copies of a book. You're not going to pay your bills off of that book. And they usually offer you between 15 to 20% of the net retail. So we're talking $1.50 a book is what you'd make with traditional publishing if they pick you. So it's not like winning the lottery or, you're getting a big check. It just doesn't work that way anymore, unless you are fully committed to building a massive following online. And some people want to do that. So if you have 100,000 followers on Instagram, 50,000 people on your email list, traditional publishing could be great. If you don't, it's probably not for you. So that's like the 1%. So then you have self-publishing. Self-publishing is the other way. Traditional publishing, they do it all for you. Self-publishing, you do it all for yourself. So you've got to design the book cover. You've got to find an editor. You've got to edit it yourself. You got to figure out how to upload the file. You have to figure out how to format the file to be Kindle versus the ebook versus the print versus the hardcover. It's very complicated, but fortunately there's a lot of tools and resources that you could do it yourself. So it's kind of like, the way that I like to explain it is, it's kind of like a house. You could go work with a builder and basically buy a house from them, and they're going to take care of all the details. So like the kind of the neighborhood house, like in a planned community, that's like the traditional publisher. They have their own system. You can't move the garage door. Like, no, it's the way it has to be. The traditional publishing have their system, but the self-publishing, it's like building your own house. You could do anything you want, but guess what? That can be really overwhelming and really expensive and very time consuming. So those are kind of the 2 polar opposites. In the last 10 years or so, there's been the rise of this new kind of third option. And the third option is called hybrid publishing. And this is potentially the best of both worlds, but also the worst of both worlds. So it depends on who you work with. So it's basically the options of self-publishing with the services of traditional publishing, but you have to pay for it. So you still own the book, but you're not having to do it all yourself. And that's kind of like working with a custom home builder. So you could build the home yourself. You could hire a prefab builder to do it, or you could work with a custom home builder. But either way, you're going to pay. you're either paying your time, your talent, or your treasure. And so, I've really come around to hybrid publishing. I think that's the future of publishing, because you doing a book cover by yourself, like I should never make my own book cover. Like I'm not a designer, so let me hire a designer. Let me hire somebody who can do the editing and that sort of thing. So I think that's the future of what makes sense in terms of instead of trying to pitch a publisher to pick you or trying to do it yourself, find somebody that you trust that you can partner with. And there's a lot of great companies out there that are doing hybrid. The nice thing is you keep a lot more of the royalty. So at the end of the day, you're still getting the benefits of most of the income, but not as much of the work doing it yourself.
Well, and not only the editing and the designing, but there's so much tech involved that you don't think about with getting it. How do you push it out to all the different publishers? How do you physically get it delivered? And, there's a lot of logistics that go far beyond even just writing the book. Next step then is how do you get it out there? And in some ways that's harder, trying to figure all that stuff out.
Yeah, we I've been running a membership site, Hopewriters, for 8 years, and then after all that experience, after interviewing over 200 people in the publishing industry, it took my team of 7 a year and a half to build our own hybrid book publishing system. A year and a half, 7 people who actually know what they're doing, and so I'm like, I'm not trying to sell you on Hope Books, although I think Hope Books is wonderful. It's like, but I'm trying to tell you, it is very complicated. It's very complicated. And so you can kind of do the cut and paste, like duct tape your own solution together. But let's be real. I love going to Goodwill and looking at the book section in Goodwill. And I was there on Friday. And as I'm going through the books, book. And then there's this shiny version, and you're like, oh, that's a self-published book. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then you go, book. Oh, there's another self-published one. They just feel self-published. Yeah. And so, with a hybrid, you can get a book that feels like a traditionally published book, but you get to keep most of the money and you get to make a lot of the decisions. And I've just heard so many horror stories about traditional publishing, the author feeling ignored, the author not being able to choose their book cover, them changing your words. There's some really junky stories out there about traditional publishing now.
Well, I was 6 years ago, I was working with an agent and that we were starting to pitch a book for traditional publishers, and publishers were interested. And on one of the rounds of edits, or early on in the process, my agent came back to me and she said, you know what, Jami, I just feel like your book is too Christianese. It's too Christian. Yeah. And I was like, I'm literally writing a Christian book to Christian women on this topic. And it was and she was a Christian agent. We were pitching to Christian publishers. And that was a moment where I went, we're going to look into self-publishing. This is not what I'm thinking. And it was just a light bulb moment that they can help polish a book, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the book that you actually wanted to write that gets out there.
That's right.
And there's just a lot that comes with that. Plus, like you were saying about platforms, people have said to me before, oh, Jami, you've got this business and a platform. You could get a book deal, no problem. That's not the case, though. I don't have 500,000 people. I am actually a very small fish, compared to that. But we do have an audience. We have people to reach. And we have become such big fans of not going that traditional publishing route. I think there are certain cases for it. But overall, it doesn't make sense in today's world anymore.
Yeah. I think, I'm a Bible guy, so I like to quote the Bible. There's 2 major biblical concepts that are related to that. One of them is the idea of being unequally yoked. And so it's like 2 oxen that are linked together. They're supposed to be going in the same direction at the same pace. When you do a business partnership with a company that doesn't align with your vision and values, they're going to pull you in one direction. Yeah. And if it's a big publisher, they're the bigger ox, and they're going to pull you away from your core values and what you want to stand up for. Especially in today's culture, if you're kind of trying to stand up biblical values, even Christian publishers are way more open to things that are not within the traditional world. I'm trying to be very vague, but I'm just saying, you have a bold message, they're not going to be, they're not going to agree with you, and they're going to edit it out, which I think is really hard, because it's if you feel like God has given you this message to share, and then they're going to edit out your message, that feels real sticky to me. But then number 2 is a borrower is slave to the lender. They're lending you money to write your book. Yeah. And so case in point, there's a very well-known author right now who went through a major devastating life crisis the week before her book came out. Mm-hmm. Very public, went off the internet for 4 months, just came back this week. The first thing she did when she came back, guess what? She's relaunching her book. Why? Because she is indebted to the publisher. Or do you think that she actually wants to launch this book? Because the book is about keeping your life together, and her life just fell apart. And so she is literally in servitude to the big publisher. Why? Because they wrote her a check. So she has to go earn that check and do the song and dance. And I mean, being really authentic and raw here, but it's so true that I see it. And it's like, you know what, if she self-published it, she could say, you know what, that book isn't true anymore, because the book is about how to keep it together. But I actually realized that out of integrity, my life was kind of a lie. I didn't know it. It's not my fault. But, you know, there's a whole situation with her family that is like, I don't think anybody should read that book, because I was talking about something I don't know anything about. But instead, she's going on all the podcasts now and relaunching this book. And it's just like, how do you sleep at night? Well, the answer is she's indebted to this big publisher, having to promote a message that she doesn't really live or really believe in. And that's an extreme example, but it happens all the time.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm like, oh, you got to be really careful who you're signing up with.
Yeah. You just lose a lot of control, and you lose a lot of just the ability to make decisions that work for you and for your business. And okay, so I had one last question I wanted to pick your brain on. So I know from personal experience that the hardest part of writing a book is the discipline to actually follow through, get it done. So do you have any tips on how to practically like make yourself make yourself actually do this project that you want to do?
Yes. First of all, you have to treat it like a job instead of a hobby. And if you think about it, you know, it took you 20 years to get to where you are in certain areas of your life. And if you're a first-time writer, it could take 20 years for you to get to that same level of skill. So I would, number one, I would invest in coaching, invest in mentorship, invest in a community that can kind of tell you, hey, it's okay to be an amateur. You're just trying to figure this thing out. So I really like the idea of success leaves clues. Like, find somebody who you know, Jesus talks about follow my rhythms. Like, what are the rhythms of a professional writer and what do they do? And I think because it's so personal to us, we feel like we know how it's supposed to be. And then it hits you, you're like, this is actually a job and this is really hard. So you have to treat it like a job. Like, if you're going to be a professional, if you're going to write a book and publish a book, you know that it's going to be hard. And so the way to get over anything hard is called discipline. There you go. It's called discipline. Yeah. You got to put in the time. Like, you just have to put in the time. So the way that I do it, number one, begin with the end in mind. I set a clear goal, a clear deadline. Number two is I have to put in the time to hit the deadline. So that means changing my life. It means saying no to volunteer opportunities. It means saying no to the trip, because if it's a priority, it means one. It means the most important. And so if you've been thinking about writing a book for 10 years, but you haven't, it's not a priority. And if you're going to write your book this year, you're going to have to say no to things you normally say yes to, so that you can make the time and the space to actually write the book. So a deadline, number one, discipline of time, number two. And I think you need some accountability, which is why I think self-publishing, kind of on the other end, self-publishing, most self-published authors never finish their book because there's zero accountability, because you're only accountable to yourself. And so accountability is the ability to count, right? So at Hope Books, we have a 164-step process, and we can count it and go, you're at step 3. Let's move on to step 4. Like, we can count it. Yeah. So find somebody who can help you count the cost, count the steps in the process, so you actually get them done.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And it's so, like, when my husband was writing his national park book series, at first we had no clue if it was going to bring in any income in our bookstore. So for him, it really had to be, you know, even though he runs our business full time, it kind of had to be a passion project at first, because we still needed to make an income. Right. And so for him, he was working on it in the weekends. He would work on it at night. And he really did. There was times where he's like, I don't want to do this. And I'm like, just do one chapter, you know, and he really, I mean, now he has 6 done, and it gets easier. The process gets easier when you've done it. Right. But he really had to treat it like that and kind of figure out where are some pockets. Otherwise, he still would be on chapter 1 of that first book, you know, and not have actually done anything. So, okay.
My bonus little hack for that is to pick a date 6 to 12 months in the future, an experience, and imagine yourself handing the book to somebody that you care about. And let's be real, you probably care about them more than you care about you. And so my first book that I ever did, was because I had the opportunity to do a workshop at a conference, and my mentor was the guy leading the workshop, leading the conference. And I wanted to hand him a copy of my book. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do everything I can so that I can hand Dan my book. And I'm doing the same thing right now. Like my next book is called The Joy of Influence, and it's about why this world is actually awesome instead of overwhelming to share your message online. It's a mindset book. And I have a very specific date. Like it's the first Tuesday of September. And because I know I'm going to have our group is coming into town, our authors are coming to town, and I want to hand them the first copy of the book. I'm going to be like, here you go. You're the first ones to get it on September 20th. So having a clear deadline and a clear goal and real people you care about and telling them, I'm going to give you a copy of my book in September, and then them expecting it, you just don't want to let them down. And I think at the end of the day, that's the thing that drives me more than anything is I just don't want to let somebody down. And so I'm able to get it done and stay up late, wake up early, do the things you need to do in order to not let the other people down because they need the message.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I want to hear a little bit though about Hopewriters and what you guys are doing. What is this hybrid process that we could do?
Oh, absolutely. Well, we have a challenge coming up. It's called the Summer Writing Challenge, how to start your book this summer. And I think that's one of the first steps in the journey. It's like if you want to do like a 5K in your life, go get some running shoes and walk around the block in those running shoes. It's like you're like, okay, I know what this feels like. Like the shoes fit. I got new shoes and I'm going to walk around the block. And like that's the first step of running your 5K. And so a book is a marathon. And so the first step of running the marathon is go get some good shoes. Yeah. And so what we have is we have a 5-day challenge called the Start Your Book This Summer Challenge. It's available at hopewriters.com/summer. And it's a great way for you to start your book. I walk you through the XYZ. I walk you through the transformational tale, helping you figure out who your reader is. And then you can kind of make progress that way. So we have a membership site called Hopewriters, which is just a really encouraging community online. And then we have our book publishing division called Hope Books, where we help first-time authors discover, share, and publish their message. But you know, you can learn about those more later. The most important thing is for you to start your book. So go to hopewriters.com/summer to start your book. And once you start your book, you're like, okay, great. Like this is actually going. Now what do I do? And, you know, compared to marathon running, that's when you start to go, oh, okay, I'm going to have to start drinking more water. And I'm going to have to start setting a routine. Like that all comes later, but like just take your first step right now. Instead of keeping and dreaming about it, actually take some action and do it.
That's wonderful. Well, we'll put the link for that below. And Brian, thank you so much for just taking this time, getting everybody excited. I have written a couple books, but even talking to you, I'm like, okay, I'm ready for the next one. Like, let's get going. So
you got that library of your life. Like it's time to do the next one.
Yes, keep working on it. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Brian. So many great things to think about. He's always super helpful. I love getting to interview him. You can hop over to Hope Books. You can also find Brian on Instagram and just check out all of the things they're doing. Hope Books is doing some really, really cool things in this industry where traditional publishing is really fading. It's not a good fit for most of us. Jason and I we didn't talk about it a whole lot on this episode, but I was actually pursuing traditional publishing for a while. I was working with an agent and we really quickly realized, well, not really quickly, but we got to the point where all of a sudden it was clear that at least at this point, unless God changed something, traditional publishing is not the route that either of us want to pursue. So we stopped working with the agent, pulled back all of our manuscripts, and we now exclusively self-publish. But that is also like a full-time job. So there's so many great options now with hybrid publishing, like Brian was talking about, that I just really want to encourage you that if there is a dream for writing a book or putting something out there into the world, that I agree with Brian, there's literally never been a better time in the world to do this. You don't have to win the lottery and luck out that a traditional publisher is going to pick you up, because the secret is everybody thinks, oh, if I just write a good enough book with a good enough hook, a publisher will pick it up. That's not true. It's not true at all in any way, shape, or form. Even me with my platform, I am small potatoes. They are going after the people who have got mega millions, and on YouTube and Instagram and following, and the famous people. The famous people can write books with traditional publishing. But it's a really exciting time in publishing right now that there is so much we can do. We've never been able to just be able to directly interact with our own audience and sell books that way. So I just want to encourage you that, yes, there's a lot of work to put in. There's a lot of research you have to do. It is a whole world you have to learn. But whether you're going to completely self-publish, use a hybrid model, there are some really, really fantastic resources out there. So I'm just going to encourage you right there. If God has laid this dream on your heart, start pursuing it. Start pursuing it and see where it leads you. All right, well, go check out Hope Books when you've got a minute, and we'll see you guys back here next week for the next episode.